Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
Thank you for taking a little bit of your day to listen to this episode of Around with Randall. As the world gets more complicated, gets faster, leadership becomes more important. And the aspect within the leadership element that I think we need to spend a few minutes talking about is decision making. Whether it's healthcare or it's academics in higher ed, maybe it's secondary education, maybe it's social services, so it's food service or home or housing insecurity, mental health challenges that come with nonprofits who serve in that area. The ability to make decisions is getting more complicated. And maybe the methodology, the philosophy that we have used for time immemorial isn't the right way to do it anymore. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what we're looking at in how we make decisions. What should we be contemplating when we do this? And how does that differ from the past? Decisions made today are so essential, particularly as there is a little bit more chaos. And maybe chaos is actually only a metaphor for speed, the speed of which things happen. It's increasing, but it's causing chaos and sometimes paralysis in organizations. I want to start with the concept of decision-making from a very high level, and then we'll kind of move into really the reality of the day. That not making a decision on something is making a decision on something. I have many nonprofit clients, some in major ways, some in minor ways, that are struggling to make decisions and they choose not to make a decision. And that is a decision because then everything stops. It's an indication that none of the things that we are proposing that might be possible are actually important enough for us to move forward. There is a penalty for making a no decision or not making any decision. And that, I think, is an underestimated, understood, and truly unappreciated important cog or component in decision making as a whole. When you are stuck, and I'm not saying it will get into the tactics here in a little bit, as we try to in every episode. When you get into the decision-making process, if over time there aren't decisions, it is just horrendous, particularly for a nonprofit, and most particularly for philanthropy. If you have another revenue stream, like tuition or state dollars or Medicaid, Medicare, or reimbursements, or other maybe you have a granting relationship with that pays you, not like a philanthropic grant, but you have a relationship with the government entity. You provide, mental support for kids, so the government's paying you. If you have another revenue stream, you have more time. But if you want philanthropy to live, bigger dollars don't come from when there's no decisions, because gift officers or people who are communicating the need don't know what to say. And so no decision is a decision. I want to start there. But let's assume we need to make decisions. Let's talk about what leadership is today in reality. The traditional leadership model really relied, and if you look back at writings into the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, on getting as much data, the completeness of it, time, analysis, planning, to make decisions. In comparison, today is all about speed and complexity and disruption. And that whether it's technology, so throw in AI, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, or it's just computerization, it's communication speed, that in some ways we have to make decisions with such complexity, speed, and disruption that it becomes harder. If we think about it just in context, so let's go back in time, and maybe not the perfect example, but one that I'm familiar with and read about. If we think about decisions in the time of the military in the 1800s, and certainly before, there was no way to get 100% understanding of the situation. Commanders would make decisions based on what information they had in front of them in that moment. And if they waited for all of the information, they never made a decision. And this is actually an interesting sidelight, nerdy people like me. This is the problem Abraham Lincoln had with many of his generals as the Union leaders in the Civil War, particularly someone like George McClellan, who was always looking for more information. George Meade do a little bit of that same example. The complexity of the situation was viewed as, well, I need more information. Part of the reason that Ulysses S. Grant was chosen and has generally seen as the primary driver of the military part of winning the war is he didn't wait to make decisions based on completeness information because he knew there never would be. Well, in some ways, that's kind of where we're headed back to. We need the understanding, the ability to make decisions without full information. The consequences for waiting, as we talked about, even if there's no decision, is paralysis. It's fear if we don't get to decisions and move the organization forward. In some ways, and I'm not going to judge the political left or right, but just what happened, the pandemic response was based upon this. We kept waiting for more information in some ways, and there wasn't any. And so there was a lot of indecision, and there would be, we're going to be in school. We're not going to be in school. We got to be 6 feet apart. No, we're not. Then it's, we're going to wear masks. No, we're not. In some ways, making a decision, to be candid, too early is just as bad as not making any decision at all. We're realizing this in kind of the technology world of AI adoption. We don't know what we don't know, so let's not use it. I'm not sure that's the best answer. Certainly market shifts in what we see and how the world operates from a trade perspective. All of these things of waiting too long can become paralyzing and create an immense amount of fear. So the philosophical shift that we have to make is this. We have to go from precision to probability. That modern leadership is more about aiming in the right direction and adjusting to be adaptable than it is a guarantee we're going to only go this way. And what's really about strategic bets, about not guaranteed outcomes, that leaders have to get comfortable with calculated risk and a sense of ambiguity. We have to be willing to say, we're going to head, if we think about a circle, this direction at 70 degrees. And in 10 days, we may shift to 65 degrees. It's almost like a navigator, the way I think about the old World War II movies, adjusting the flight's path depending on the wind, the altitude, changes in the engine in terms of the speed of the aircraft, taking celestial navigation. They're adjusting, come 2 degrees left to 271. That's what leadership has got to be about. I want to quote Jeff Bezos, who may or may not like. I'm not interested in that, but I do find his thought process on decision making and how he built Amazon unbelievably important for us today, maybe for you to be using executably in your office. Most decisions should probably be made with somewhere around 70% of the information you wish you had. It's saying if you get to somewhere where you've got a majority, or in this case, a plurality of information, and it gives you a sense of a door to walk through, then you should start walking through it. We will never again get a completeness of information in a time frame that we need to make the decisions that are required. And so we have to shift and become more comfortable, as I discussed, with the idea of ambiguity and about adjustments, and that decision making isn't a one-time decision, it's a multi-time decision that we're going to continue to adjust as we learn more. So let's jump into the tactical. How do we do this with incomplete data? How do we do this when we only have 60, 70, 80% when we want 100? Well, the first thing I would say when we talk about 6 different things you have to consider in this process is adopting a bias for action. Number one, that you have to tell yourself, tell your team, and write it on the board that we are not going to wait for 100% of the information. I'm going to empower myself, empower our team, empower the organization to act, even though we have a little bit of uncertainty. And in some ways, we might even put a time-bound decision on this, i.e., within 2 weeks, we're going to make this decision, or by Friday, we're going to make this decision. Everybody go out and get as much information as you can. We're going to put it together, but by Friday, we're going to decide. What that does is, from a philosophical perspective and from a leadership declaratory perspective, tell everyone we're moving forward. And I would also add then, which we'll get to in a minute, be open to adjustment. All too often, I find that organizations are not adopting this kind of basic premise that the bias we have isn't for the perfect decision, but for a decision that is based on all the information data we can get within a reasonable time frame. Because we got to move. So number one, adopt a bias for action. Number two is trying to figure out the framework in which you want to operate. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you a couple of examples. There's, in the decision-making philosophy, there's something called OODA, OODA. It's a loop, meaning you're going to use this acronym. Here's what the acronym is. It's observe, orient, decide, and act. In some ways, the simplicity is gather data, make a decision, evaluate that decision, and then adjust. But OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. The reason that this, and then I'll give you another framework that's more, I think, abrupt, but I think really interesting, is that you want people to know what you expect of them. Part of decision making, particularly if you're a large organization, maybe even a smaller organization, but it's a team that's informing a CEO, executive, someone to decide. Good CEOs, good leaders are looking for input, looking for guidance, for expertise, for knowledge, for perspective, and then they make a decision. Well, what is it I want from my team to help me do that? Do I just tell them, or am I actually interested in their opinion? And the decision framework, there's a number of them out there, but I like the two we talk about here today, OODA, OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act, frame what we're looking for the team to make the direction known. A subpart of this is what I think the Amazon model has really elevated. I think there were other ways of looking at it in the past, but they've really kind of solidified it, and then I think it's been studied academically. I know it has been. Is the two-way door versus the one-way door. A two-way door, the way that Jeff Bezos and Amazon kind of built the Amazon brand and the Amazon empire, is the two-way door is that we can set a direction, walk through the door, but then we've very got to quickly figure out, was this the right door to go through? Knowing that we can come back 2 steps and choose another door. Meaning we can make a decision, we can start down that direction, and the adjustment, particularly if it's a big decision, the adjustment may be to retreat a little bit. And it may be a little costly, but it's not seminal costly. It's not unbelievably painful. We just have to adjust, and we may have to pull back because it's a two-way door. We can go through it and we can come back. A one-way door is a lot more complicated because the decision you make there is it's irreversible. We are going this direction. We may adjust on the other side of the door 2, 3, 5 degrees left or right, but we're not coming back 180 degrees. And it takes more care in that decision because obviously it's irreversible in many ways, or so seminal that it could affect the organization as a whole. But we got to move through it. When you come to this decision, is what we're looking at a two-way door, meaning we can be a little more aggressive and make the decision now knowing we can come back, or is it a one-way door and once we do it, we're done? I think of the closures of universities, of the mergers of like Boys and Girls Clubs that we've talked about, you've read about, certainly the closing of hospitals. They're one-way doors. Once we do this, we're kind of committed. Two-way doors are, hey, we're going to look at maybe adding this program or taking this program away, or hey, there's a lot of different things we could do. The reason that's important inside of the ODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act, is that there's a lot less act on the backside of a one-way door. So you have to figure out which ones are the consequential decisions and which ones are the program shifting or organizational shifting ones. Number 3 is, in order to adjust, make those 2, 3, 5, 10 degree kind of pivots as you go through your decision-making process, is creating a feedback loop. What are the outcomes, not the final ones, but maybe interim ones or along the way ones that allow us to make that core correction? What data do we need? Do we have a fail-safe that literally tells us we're on the right direction or not? And are we getting the data, in a timely fashion that allows for a velocity of the next mini decisions on the change of pace or change of direction? Mini, left or right, 2, 3, 4 degrees. If you don't have feedback loops, I like data, but data can also be personal stories, anecdotal. You hear the same anecdotal perspective amongst a staff or maybe your stakeholders, and I think of stakeholders as the community leaders in nonprofit world, and it's the same anecdotal. It comes from 6 different people, but they all said the same thing, and they aren't the same 6 people hearing from the same 6 feedback loops. They're all over the place, and they're independent of each other. That's data. That's a feedback loop. So you can have hard data and what might be considered qualitative, kind of the conversations. But use that feedback loop and be ready with your team to say, what does the feedback loop data tell us about the decision that we made? Number 4 is leverage collective intelligence. Are there other places you can go get data that are not just from you? Sometimes the data that we have is data within a vacuum and is not data that's large enough, cross-functional really, to get us the right perspective on the decisions and the adjustments that we can make. This may mean partnering with other organizations or looking at outside data sources. Maybe you want to you get a trusted group of people and you do like an opinion poll group or a kitchen cabinet to say, look, we made the decision 6 weeks ago. What's going on in the community? What are you hearing? Maybe that's a part of your board or a board committee. The way you do this is that when you have this either hard data or qualitative kind of collective intelligence, is some type of decision huddles where you're getting that feedback. That's why, and I did a podcast on the idea of a kitchen cabinet, which is an unofficial group of leaders that maybe aren't fiduciaries on your board, but are connected to the community that can give you a incredible feedback loop that is some type of leveraged collective information. Doesn't mean they make the decision, but they may provide you insight. How do you do that? How do you get either data from the government, the community, other nonprofits, and the people in the community who might be able to help inform you about the decisions that you're reaching and what impact they have? Number 5 is set a clear decision criteria. Is it incredibly clear what the goal is that we made the decision on? And have we been consistent about that? The goal, generically, shouldn't change very much. Now, how you measure the goal could change a whole bunch. But if your goal is to, decrease, let's say a health issue in your community, or we're going to decrease, in food insecurity, that ain't changing. How do you define it? And then how do you measure against it? This then gets into the conversation of, if we keep the clarity of the goal, what we don't allow to have happen is that we allow consensus to overwhelm decision making. We're back to what Jeff Bezos talked about the 70%. If you wait for consensus, you're never going to get anywhere. And particularly in today's world, there's very little times where there's any consensus. It just is the world we're living in. So you've got to prioritize enough information and enough buy-in, but not consensus. And that's based upon, here was our goal. Did we reach it? The last part of that is, can you document it? Can you see it in that evaluation, reevaluation process? Number 6 is that you build a culture that is tolerant, okay with risk. Jason Jennings does a terrific job in his writings around the idea of small bets. I love to use it from a strategic planning perspective. And in doing so, I'm able to talk about, do we have enough, based on his premise, enough resources to leverage the strategy and the plan that you have? And if not, how much of it can we undertake? Well, that comes with a premise that we're willing to take some risks. And they have to be reasonable risks. They have to be ones that are meaningful and are not going to overwhelm the organization. This brings into the issues of realizing what resources we have, what kind of communication we're going to execute on, how are we going to message certain decisions, how are we going to not punish people for bringing either things to the table or the fact they were responsible for something in a very short span of time. We're not going to punish them when it didn't go quite perfectly. Oh, you're out. You do that, you eliminate a culture that's open to risk. And so part of this conversation needs to be a tolerance that we're going to take a chance or two. It's going to be appropriate for us, small bets, Jason Jennings, and it's going to be meaningful against the goals that we're trying to accomplish. And we'll make adjustments based on that risk. These are 6 things that I highly recommend you integrate into your decision making. And it can be big decisions or little decisions. If you're the gift officer or the plan giving person or you're an infrastructure, wherever, take some of these things to your leader and say, hey, here's how we can improve. And if you're the leader, get them down on paper and say, are we doing these things? Are we, number 1, adopting the idea of bias for action? We're going to prioritize not being stuck in concrete. Number 2 is that we're going to have a process. We're going to think about, as I talked about, ODA, or a two-way two-door or one-door thought process. Number 3, we're going to create feedback loops so we can adjust. We know that the initial decision or initial direction isn't going to be the final one. That we're going to create a sense of a leveraged collective intelligence. We're not going to just depend on internal data or limited data. We're going to look outside to see if what we're finding and feeling is actually happening. That we're going to keep in mind this idea of a clarity around the initial reason we made the decision and what our goal was in that, and then adjust as we go based upon that overall goal. And lastly, we're going to build an internal acceptance of risk. We just can't take the safe road, perfectly safe every time. Otherwise, we may be out of business. Decision-making is really important right now on lots of different fronts at lots of different levels. My hope was today is it gives you a context to think about how to do it and tactics to execute into doing it so your organization can be stronger, can make the decisions and adjust as it goes to the things that need to be done. When and if done well, what I've learned is great decision-making instills confidence. It brings people to the table. They're more willing to interject, to engage, to be a part of the solution. They are don't feel paralyzed, and it allows us to go out and tell our story, which in the nonprofit world is pretty much everything we got, so that we can tell what we need and how we need to match it with people's passions of what they're trying to accomplish to make the community a better place. Don't forget to check out the blogs at Hallett Philanthropy, 2 per week. And if you'd like to reach out to me, it's podcast@hallettphilanthropy.com. Decision-making in interesting times, challenging times, that was the subject today, but it embodies what I say each and every episode, that nonprofit work, philanthropy, has never been more needed. We are the gap between the free enterprise capitalistic system that wants to make money and the government that really is not all that efficient most of the time. We're that hole. We fill it. And if you're not making decisions, you're not filling it. You become part of the whole. not the reason the hole fills. Please remember what I say at the end of every episode, because it's quintessential to who you are, what your organization is, and the idea of decision making. Some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, and then there are those who wondered what happened. In one sense, in comparison to today, people who don't make decisions are people who are wondering what happened. People who make things happen are the ones making decisions or setting the framework, like we've talked about, to make decisions. And then in a second level, making decisions so your nonprofit serves its community, you become someone, your organization becomes someone who makes things happen for the people, those that we serve, the community, that parts of the community that need it the most. They're wondering what happened. That's the beauty of philanthropy and nonprofit work. And what you do every day is critical to filling that hole between government and free enterprise that allows people to be served in a more meaningful way to make your community a better place. Man, I cannot imagine a better way to spend a life and a career than trying to figure out how to do just that. I'll look forward to seeing you the next time, right back here on the next edition of Around with Randall. And don't forget, make it a great day.